Ow!
Greetings, YouTube. This is DecKrash, better known as Brandon, here with another book review. The first one I've done in quite some time. And I'm sorry about that, guys. Like I said, combined issues with my computer needing to be wiped and then redone, and of course, the fact that I haven't really been reading as much as I need to. You know, it's kind of a shame, me being a writer and all. But I am back and with a new book review. Today's book that I'm reviewing is a sort of a classic, actually, among science fiction readers. It's from 1980, called The Snow Queen by Joan Vinge. Interesting little history behind my finding this book out. I have a book by DK. DK does a lot of like in-depth books that explore elements of a thing. Like DK does a lot of those books that show those bits and pieces of Star Wars tech and stuff like that, with with little elements from the show with little in-depth descriptions of it. Kind of like they like doing the books of fluff for certain franchises. So this book, however, was sort of a compressed history of science fiction up to the late 90s, which is when I bought it. And in that book, I there was like a listing of prominent science fiction authors from the early days of science fiction. We're talking about the late 1800s up to the late 1990s. And in that section, they had two particular authors that stood out: Werner Vinge and Joan Vinge. Werner Vinge got me interested in a book called A Fire Upon the Deep, which to this day I still have not finished reading, though I will end up reading it sooner or later. And Joan Vinge, she stood out because, well, interestingly enough, she is the ex-wife of Werner Vinge, and ended up creating the script to the movie Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And if you have not seen Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, I know some of you guys are youngins out there, I highly recommend it. If you liked Fury Road, you'll love Beyond Thunderdome. And even though it takes place, of course, before Fury Road. Anyway, with that being said, and by the way, I was so used to pronouncing it Vinge for the longest time, and then I listened to an audiobook of this book, and it was supposed to be pronounced Vingy, so please excuse me if I slip back to saying Vinge and not realize it. So, with all that being said, I started reading The Snow Queen. Oh, that had to have been back when I was starting college. But I tried reading it from that point on several times and could never really get into the book. It was a crying shame because I'd read a lot about it, and it sounds like a story that was right up my alley. And I think maybe it was Joan Vinge's writing style that I couldn't quite get into, or maybe that the story started out a little bit, I don't know, maybe not all that attractive. But I'll get to that later. But ultimately, I finally managed to finish reading the book, mainly through audiobook. Though I had read, most of the book. I had a paperback copy. I was going to do this as a video where you could actually see my ugly mug and where I could present the book to you. But unfortunately, you just have this picture of one of the variations of the covers for your viewing torture. So anyway, finally got a chance to finish reading it. And so for starters, and I'm very sorry, guys, I'm a little bit rusty at doing this. For starters, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about the story. It takes place in a distant future where there was once an interstellar empire, but it collapsed a long time ago up at this point. They're never clear on how long it was. The way they speak of it. It may have been centuries up to 1,000 years, 1,000 years prior. And of course, the human race is settled among many different worlds among the stars, which has evolved into many interesting cultures that, for most, are only touched upon in the story because the story takes place chiefly on a planet called Tiamat, a planet that is more water than land. And the story centers on a girl named Moon. Moon, Dawn Treader, Summer, and her cousin Sparks. Now, make of this what you want, but the story makes no bones about the two being in love. Now, I think what it is that the culture among the Summer people, which is what her people are, there are two clans on Tiamat, Summers and Winters. The Summer people are a more primitive people, whereas the Winters tend to be more inclined towards technology that the hegemony, which is the ruling governing body now of all these worlds, provides on every once every it's gonna be during a 150-year cycle. So Moon and Sparks are cousins, although they are in love. The story talks about them being intimate with each other. It doesn't go into like any real, you know, intricate detail outside of the poetic. And they pledge themselves to one another, and then Moon decides to want to become a Sibyl, which are basically like seers in their society. But there's a lot more to Sibyls than meets the eye, which I will talk about later. But in truth, Moon is a clone of the queen of this world, the Winter Queen or the Snow Queen, who is a woman named Aryan Road. She's the spitting image of Aryan Road, but of course that's understandable because of course she's a clone. Now, Aryan Road has ruled this planet for 150 years and is kept immortal by a specific serum that's derived from these creatures that exist in the oceans of Tiamat called Murs. I'll get back to that in just a moment. I want to step back for a second because I forgot to tell you that this story was based off of the fairy tale of the same name by Hans Christian Andersen. For those of you who have not read The Snow Queen or had it told to you as a child, I just say go ahead to YouTube and you'll find different iterations of the story all over the place. And go ahead and check that out. Little known fact, or maybe a bit better known than I might think. The Snow Queen was the story that was the basis for the movie Frozen by Disney. Though you wouldn't guess it because Frozen is nothing like the Snow Queen. Very little remains of that story that is basically that is of the original tale. And I could go on with that, but I won't. So, getting back to the Snow Queen, as I was saying, Aryan Road is kept alive through this whole 150-year cycle through the use of a serum that is derived from Murs, these creatures that live in the oceans of Tiamat. And she rules over all of Tiamat as both an eternally youthful but also ruthless monarch. But she wants to undo a particular cycle that has existed on Tiamat for many, many generations, and that is the summer-winter cycle. You see, Tiamat orbits a binary star, which gives it super long seasons. Sort of similar if you've ever read Brian Aldiss's Heliconia series, whereas Heliconia's seasons last thousands of years, the seasons on Tiamat last a few centuries. And the so once every 150 years, the planet comes close to a black hole called the Black Gate, which the hegemony uses to travel to the other worlds of its empire. The actual star drive that used to power the ships of the old empire, that technology has been forgotten. So the only way they can go to these different worlds is by use of these black gates. But for another cycle of 150 years, the planet is too far away from the black gates for the black gates to be useful. And so the same way that Tiamat comes close to the Black Gates and goes farther away, society on Tiamat ebbs and flows. For 150 years, there is a Winter Queen or a Snow Queen, and for the other 150 years, there is a Summer Queen. And during that 150 years, the people of Summer rule on Tiamat. And as I said before, the Summers are the primitives, whereas the Winters are the ones that thrive on the tech that is provided to them by the hegemony for that 150-year cycle. And so for 150 years, you have a time of technological achievements and advancements. And then for 150 years, the planet regresses back into a state of into a primitive state until the planet comes back close to the Black Gate again, and then the Winter Queen takes control with the death of the Summer Queen. So, what I was saying about Aryan Road is she wants to break this cycle, and the way she has decided to do this is to raise up a queen in her likeness, both in mind and body, and so she uses illegal technology on several couples that she finds in the during a party after the visit of the governors, and she basically implants several couples with a clone of herself, but only one manages to survive, and that is Moon. Now, Moon has lived a relatively happy life up to this point, but when she and Sparks, her cousin, go to try to become Sibyls, for some reason Sparks, who is a summer like her, but who knows that his father was an off-worlder and has always been curious about the lives of off-worlders, for some reason the Sibyl process does not accept him, and so this moment splits them apart, even though they promise themselves to each other. And this tears Moon up inside because she believes that just because she's a Sibyl shouldn't mean that she and Spark should be separated. But the Summers have very primitive beliefs about Sibyls, and one is called death to to harm a Sibyl and death to love a Sibyl, because they believe that something in their bodies will kill a person if they harm them, do any kind of action against a Sibyl that causes the spilling of blood, or to love a Sibyl, if you're not a Sibyl yourself, something in their bodies will harm you if you are intimate with that Sibyl. Now, these beliefs are not too far off the mark as Moon grows to understand during her odyssey. So during this time, she goes through her Sibyl training, but wants to go and meet Sparks once again. So she tries to journey to Carbuncle when Sparks goes there too. Now, Carbuncle is the capital city of I told you guys that I it's been a while since I've done this, so I don't know why I'm locking up. Anyway, it's the capital city of Tiamat. Please excuse me, everyone. So, Carbuncle is the capital city of Tiamat, from where the Snow Queen rules. Now, Sparks, after going through some trouble himself, ends up running into the Snow Queen, who takes him in, and he ends up becoming her Starbuck, the the lover that she chooses. She's had many Starbucks. So, and this particular Starbuck, Sparks bests in combat. Now, the reason why he goes with Aryan Road is, of course, she looks like Moon. And so he finds it easy to fall in love with her. And of course, Aryan Road ends up falling in love with him as well. Now, during this time, as I said, Moon decides after her civil training that she and Sparks do not have to be apart, and she goes into to Carbuncle, or at least takes a journey to Carbuncle to go and meet him. Now, before I go any further, I forgot to mention what Sibyls are. Like I said, Sibyls are sort of like seers, oh, what was the word? Prophetesses, but in a different way. You can tell that their powers are technology based. You ask them specific questions, and they go into a trance state and give back an answer, almost in a form of in a way that a computer responds. And that is what Moon ends up becoming. She has to have special training in order to prevent herself from going into the trance state every time she even hears just a casual question asked by other people. So once she is finished, once she is finished with her training, she goes to try to meet Sparks, but runs afoul of some smugglers, and they end up leaving the planet with her, taking her and Sparks far apart. And they go through the Black Gate, but and during her journey to another world called Karamog, which is kind of the capital world of the hegemony, where the most of the technology is made and comes from. She is gone only a few weeks, but because of the time difference, by passing through the event horizon of the Black Gate, 5 years passes on Tiamat. And so during her time on Karamonk, she learns about the true nature of the hegemony and the reason why the hegemony has things the way that it is on Tiamat. It's to sort of keep them under control. During the winter rule, Tiamat harvests the Murs for their it's called the water of life, that serum that prevents aging, and it's taken off world, and people use it all the time to stay basically eternally young. And then when the planet goes too far from the Black Gate, everything is shut off, and the planet is allowed to go into a state of well, I don't want to say barbarism, but just regress back to a primitive state. So with this system in place, it's sort of a way of keeping Tiamat under their control, and keeping the harvesting the Murs under control. Not only that, but in Carbuncle, Sibyls are forbidden because the hegemony tries to keep the people of Tiamat believing that Sibyls are a biohazard, and so the Winters, even though they may be more have more of an affinity for the technology of the hegemony, they are pretty much kept just as ignorant as the Summers, because people who are native to Tiamat are not allowed off world. And it's for that very reason, because the hegemony is worried about somebody finding the truth. And there's also other deeper truths that Moon ends up coming into knowledge of later on when she returns to Tiamat, because the whole time she's driven by her love for Sparks. And when she returns to Tiamat, she finds that a lot of things have changed. Now, on Tiamat, the time is coming closer for the time of change, where the Winter Queen, the Snow Queen, will give way and pass the crown to the Summer Queen, and the Snow Queen will go into the ocean and die with her Starbuck. But once Aryan Road has learned that Moon has left the planet, she has to drastically change her plans, and she is furious. And she takes her pain out on a side character in the story who has just as strong a tale as Moon, and that is a woman named Jerusha Palathion, who is basically, they're called Blues, which are basically the police force on Tiamat. So the story, though it focuses on Moon, also has a sort of a B plot involving the Queen and her Starbuck, or Sparks, and then of course the story centering on Jerusha Palathion and her partner, another cop named BZ Gundalinu. This book has some very complicated names. I'll get to that in a bit. So in the end, the story kind of whittles down to how Moon, armed with this new knowledge and understanding of what's going on Tiamat, you know, finally understanding what she needs to do, and understanding who, and coming to the understanding of who and what she is, in order to change things on Tiamat permanently, in spite of what the hegemony has set up. Now, I don't want to spoil everything for you at the end. I really want you guys to read the book. And I hope that in spite of my stuttering, I gave a pretty good overview of the plot. Now, outside of that, I want to talk a little bit about the characterizations. And I believe that Joan Vinge does a great job with this. Her writing really gets into the emotional states and the thoughts of the character. She really knows how to take what's going on inside and write it out in a very eloquent way. Now, this works both to her credit and kind of against the book, because sometimes it makes things a little too introspective, a little too flowery, and I think that might bore some people, and maybe that was the reason why I wasn't really feeling the book in the very beginning, because of Vinge's tendency to get a little too involved into the emotional state. And I mean, I've read books like this before. Her writing style is kind of reminiscent of Anne McCaffrey's. And Anne McCaffrey is another author I would love to talk about one day. I'd have to go back and read at least one of her books in order to really do that, because Anne McCaffrey was a huge influence for me when I first started writing. But what I'm trying to say, though, that's another story for another time. What I'm trying to say is that Vinge's writing is kind of like this, where Anne McCaffrey does get into the emotional states of her characters, but I think Anne McCaffrey pulls it off a little bit better than Joan Vinge does. I mean, that's not to say that Joan Vinge's writing isn't any good, but there are some parts where I'm kind of, thinking, why are you're just kind of really milking it for for all it's worth. You kind of need to, my little Monty Python troop in my head is like, get on with it. But otherwise, she still weaves really good characters. Arian Road, like I said, she's beautiful and powerful and knows it and is ruthless. And this is an interesting thing. Arian Road, though portrayed, I guess, as the primary antagonist of the story, she's not evil, actually. She's doing what she's doing actually for the betterment of her people and wants Tiamat to kind of be on equal standing with the hegemony. But she's willing to go to any lengths to do it. And unfortunately, with Arian Road, she's the kind of person whom the ends justify the means. Then you have Sparks, who starts off as this wide-eyed, almost childlike person with almost childlike wonder, and becoming a very jaded person as time goes by, having committed many different sins just for the love of Arian Road, because Arian Road reminds him of Moon. Then you have Moon, of course, who is just driven throughout the entire plot by her love for Sparks, wanting nothing more than to see them reunited. And of course, and this is just a wonderful pastiche of the main character from the original Hans Christian Andersen Snow Queen, whose drive is to get her best friend back because she loves him so much. And Moon is just an amazing person, because as the story progresses, you realize Moon is a type of a person who sees the best in people, and it's just easy to love and even fall in love with, as other characters do throughout the tale. She just seems to be a person who's just such grace. Now, it does, though, kind of make me think that maybe she is kind of a Mary Sue, because when I think about it, she really doesn't have any fault. I guess if there's one fault she has, is that she is so single-minded in what she wants to do, in just trying to get back to Sparks, she's driven by the dream of them being together again and in love again and wanting things to be the way they were, that it kind of blinds her to a lot of things, that really want to help her to, that might have helped her to, be a bit more realistic. But that's just how I see it. And then, of course, the two side characters, Jerusha Palathion and BZ Gundalinu, they start off, you thinking it's just sort of dyed-in-the-wool cops, but you see Jerusha, as the things in her life progress, how she has been dealt with by the Snow Queen for her failure in trying to keep Moon safe, and how her life kind of spirals into just mediocrity and monotony. And then Gundalinu, after the stuff that after the personal hell he goes through just by happenstance, and then how his life ends up changing, meeting with Moon. I think those characters do a really good job of showing the effects on the quote unquote common man, that the events that are going on involving Moon and involving the Queen and involving Starbuck or Sparks have on how they have that effects that they all have on the common people. So like I said, Vinci does a great job of just making these characters really come to life. They are real people by the time you really get into this book and the plot really gets going. And there are many other side characters, both human and alien, that come and go, and you really just kind of grow to love them, even the ones that die. You really feel sad about their deaths. And then, of course, there's the milieu of the story, the world in which the story takes place. And as I said before, if you want to really get me into a book, you give me one with excellent world building, and that is where the Snow Queen shines. Though there are some things that are kept kind of fuzzy, it really draws you to want to know more about this universe the story takes place in, especially when you start learning about what the Sybils are and what gives them that it's not so much prognostication, but just that data analyzing ability. And not only that, when you start learning about elements of hegemony and elements of the old empire, it's a world built on top of an older world that really hooks you in. When you see just how society in Carbuncle is set up, and then when Moon goes to Karamok, and how the technoarchs, I think they're called, their society is striated. Though life on Karamog is was a little bit confusing for me. It's clear that Vinci put a lot of thought into what is going on in this story and the world that everybody takes place in. The society of the summers, how primitive they are compared to the society of the winters, with all the dizzying array of technologies that are at their command. All about to be shut down and turned off when the change happens, and everyone who wants to leave the planet is allowed to leave. So it builds up an amazing world, and I absolutely love that. So on the whole, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think this book was a good, just plain 7. I enjoyed it, though like I said, this is a book that I was very slow to get into, and really, I think it's simply because just the writing style kind of bogs you down a little bit. But when you can get past that, you have an amazing tale of love and loss and friendship and determination that really keeps you wondering what's going to happen next and keeps you going. And it's really done a great job being patterned after the classic fairy tale. I recommend you read Hans Christian Andersen's version of the Snow Queen first. It's a little short fairy tale, and then go ahead and dive into the Snow Queen. Interestingly enough, Joan Vinge has made other books in that world, particularly one that continues the tale called The Summer Queen, which I feel that I do need to read. Even though I felt that the ending of the book gave good closure, there was sort of a hint of uncertainty there. So I still want to check and see what's going on. So everyone, that's about it for me. I hope that I've given you some reasons to like this book and get interested in it. If you have any questions or comments, of course, leave them down below. As always, keep it civil. I'll have a link in the doobly-doo to where you can buy the book on Amazon or on Audible if you feel so inclined. The Audible audiobook version is actually very well narrated, so I highly recommend that. So, like I said, that's it for me, everyone. Thanks once again for listening. I should be reading a bit more and having more book reviews come out as time permits. So, until next time, everyone, thank you very much for watching. And as always, this is DecKrash, better known as Brandon. Stay lucky and stay blessed. Take care.